Hello, everybody. It is 3:32, which of course means it is time for one of our afternoon STEM shows here at the Headwaters Science Center. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the educators here. You're probably used to seeing me on Fridays by now. I usually do the Friday show. And like most Fridays, what I'm going to be doing is doing sort of a follow-up talk to the story or the book that Lee read on Wednesday. So if you missed this, you can go back and check on our YouTube channel. There will be a video of Lee reading this book that was about women in space, kind of talking about the history of women as they've gone to space. And so one of the parts about this that I thought was really, really interesting was it starts out with a segment just called The Pioneers, where it's talking about sort of the first people to have gone to space. And of course, it talks about people like Yuri Gagarin, who first went to space in 1961, was the first human in space, also the first human to orbit the Earth, Yuri Gagarin. It talks about like Alan Shepard and John Glenn, all of these very early humans to have gone to space, in the lead up to, of course, the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, who goes to space in 1963 and was also the first woman to orbit the Earth then as well. But, like I said, it's interesting that they refer to this as the Pioneers, because there is a whole litany of other missions that go to space before Yuri Gagarin ever goes to space. And a lot of them are unmanned stuff. A lot of it is just like, we're just shooting a thing up into space to see if we can even make it type of missions. I don't know exactly what year Sputnik happens, but it's like the first thing to enter orbit is in like the early 50s sometime, I think it is. But we're first sending things into space like as far back as like the 40s. The German V2 rockets are the first things that are able to leave Earth's atmosphere and officially make it into space. And one thing you'll probably hear me saying a little bit is kind of making a distinction between making it into space and making it into orbit. So those are two separate kind of states. Making it into space basically means you got out of Earth's atmosphere. Making it into orbit is a little bit harder. You have to actually get up and get to a point where you can like not just fall straight back down, basically, is what I mean when I say getting into orbit. And so you'll see as we're talking a little bit about sort of these other pioneers, these precursor pioneers to even Yuri Gagarin, some distinctions made there. So just getting that out of the way up front. But as like many things in the sciences, when it's a thing that is like potentially going to be affecting humans, typically we don't start just immediately testing things on humans. We run tests leading up to like actually getting humans involved, especially with something as dangerous as space travel, where if something goes wrong, like that person's just dead. And obviously we don't want that, so we test it on other stuff first. Like I said, it could be just like, just testing a rocket, see if we can get a rocket to fly up into space and actually come back down and land in a way that's not catastrophic. That's kind of step one of it, is like, can we even get there? Except part two of it is, can like a living thing even like survive that type of stress being put on your body? Because I mean, to get up into space, you got to put yourself on a pretty powerful engine to get up that high. Your body's got to undergo a lot of stress, a lot of G-forces to even be able to get to space, let alone like, be able to actually function once you get there. And so a lot of the testing and that type of stuff gets done on animals. And so I have here in front of me a bunch of live specimens, and these guys are all not necessarily the exact same species, but are close relations to species that have been to space in some capacity, and for most of them actually species that went to space before humans did. And so we're just going to kind of go through the timeline here, talk a little bit about each of these missions that some of these animals went on. Kind of what they were maybe a first for, if they were a first. We just have a little appreciation for the space animals that were kind of a precursor to, not just the women in space, but humans in space in general. And so 1947 is actually when the first Earthlings reach space, and it's a crate of fruit flies is the first thing that goes to space. They sent a crate of fruit flies. They just barely got out of the atmosphere. It's about 60 miles up you got to get out of the atmosphere. They just barely crested in there, and the fruit flies actually made it back. They survived. The first manned mission to space was actually successful. The fruit flies made it. And there was a bunch of missions that were kind of similar to that, where they're sending not just like fruit flies, but also they're testing with a bunch of like plants and mosses and algae and things like that. They run a lot of that stuff in like the mid to late 40s is kind of the the era where we're talking about here, kind of right after World War II, where they're literally just using like German V2 rockets to try and do this. Rockets that were designed to, carry bombs during the war, but were able to get into space too, it turns out. And so, like I said, the fruit flies are the first ones. So shouts to the fruit flies for being the true space pioneers. Going forward into a little bit higher life, and like I said, the reason you're doing this is generally to test things like G-forces on the body of an organism as you're sending it up into space. And so the very first vertebrate to successfully go into space, the first the term you'll see a lot is like upper animal or higher animal to make it into space, was a rhesus monkey named Albert II, who went to space in 1949. He broke through and made it into space. He unfortunately didn't survive re-entry, but he got there. He made it. Not too much longer after that, 1951, is the first manned mission to actually make it into space and return successfully. And it's two Russian space dogs named Saigan and Dejik are the first vertebrates to make it into space and actually return successfully. So, like I said, it took 4 years to go from, the fruit flies making it to anything higher than a fruit fly making it, basically. And then, of course, you have the famous one, the first Earthling to actually orbit planet Earth, is actually several years later. Like, there's a break from 1951 where they're like, yeah, we made it into space, but rocketry had a ways to go before they could actually get into orbit in a sustainable way. And so the first Earthling to ever make it into orbit and actually successfully orbit the Earth was a Russian space dog by the name of Laika, who, like I said, has become something of an icon since. Laika, unfortunately, also did not survive re-entry back into the atmosphere. And so those are kind of our real, early precursor animals. And now we're getting into the stuff that, we have sitting in front of me here. So as far as I can tell, the first animal that I have on the table in front of me that successfully made it into space was a rabbit. And we talked a little bit about this bunny yesterday, because this, obviously, when Lee reads, he always reads to a bunny, or almost always reads to a bunny. It's usually Orion. But a rabbit was actually, like I said, as far as the animals we have here, one of our early pioneers as far as a space-going, at least mammal. And so there was, again, a Russian rabbit, a Russian cosmonaut bunny by the name of Marfusha. That was the first one to make it in space, and that's in 1959. She was sent into space with 2 dogs as well. So you'll see that on some of these missions where it's like, yeah, we sent 2 dogs, a bunny, a crate of flies, some frogs, that type of thing. They just sending a whole pile of stuff up there and loading them up full of sensors and seeing how they react, what their heart rate does, what their breathing does, all that type of stuff. Again, because they're basically stress testing for potential humans going to space. And so Marfusha in 1959 is a bunny that goes into space. A bunny, not Marfusha. Marfusha made it to space. She did not make it into orbit and return, though. But Marfusha made it into space and returned, so Marfusha actually made it. But pretty shortly thereafter, there was the first mission to make it into orbit and then successfully return. That was in 1960. And again, it was technically captained by 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka. But one of their crewmates on that mission was another rabbit. A rabbit that, as far as I can find, didn't have a name. It was just a rabbit that was also on the ship. But a rabbit was actually a part of the first orbited mission to successfully return from space. There was a rabbit as a part of that mission. And now we have Orion, who's going wild on my newspaper I put in that tub with him right now. Frogs are another one that, kind of weirdly, I was trying to, it seems like there was a lot of unsuccessful missions that happened to feature frogs in them. As I was going through the history of, all these attempted launches, it's yeah, there was a mission that we tried to send 2 frogs into space among a bunch of other stuff, but it, exploded before it actually made it into space.
First space frogs.
And the first frogs I was able to find that successfully actually made it into space and actually did also return we actually have a co-missioned or co-piloted mission here between two of our critters here at the Science Center, where, like I said, the first frogs I could find, I can't say for sure if they're the first frogs, but also the first guinea pig in space happened to be on the same mission. And what's really cool about that mission is it's in 1961, March 9th, 1961, which for those real like space historian nerds out there, you'll know that that is about a month before Yuri Gagarin went to space. This was, again, as far as I can tell, the last mission, the last test that was run before actually sending a person into orbit and having them return, was a guinea pig and some frogs, and then like a dog was the last one. And so that was the first guinea pig to go into space. And again, they're all Russian frogs and Russian guinea pigs and a Russian dog. But yeah, like literally, like if that mission doesn't go well, Yuri Gagarin probably doesn't go to space when he does, because that was literally the last one, like less than a month before the first manned mission into space. And so, again, pioneers to a certain degree. And so there's other critters that went before them, but, you know, were ones that were very prevalent for that specific purpose, which I think is very neat. And so Yuri Gagarin is April 1961. Alan Shepard is less than a month later. He's May 1961, so the first American in space. The Americans ran kind of a similar timeline mission where they sent a chimpanzee into space like less than a month before Alan Shepard did, who was the first like hominid primate in space, first ape in space, was a chimpanzee named, his name was Ham, that got sent right before Alan Shepard, and again, had a successful mission, and that's what, you know, made the Americans like be willing to pull the trigger on sending their guy into space, was that Ham made it back okay.
Good work, Ham.
But as we kind of like cross that threshold of like just like the stress testing period, just like can a thing survive 40 Gs while it's flying up into space, we kind of start moving into more goals beyond just like getting into orbit. It starts turning into like sort of endurance testing. It's like radiation exposure testing. It's you're out in space more because you don't have the atmosphere protecting you from the sun. And we start seeing some other folks start to show up, and looks like she's gonna make me show you her right now anyway. So this is our box turtle, and unfortunately it wasn't a box turtle that I'm gonna talk about right this second, but there was a mission that was captained by two Russian tortoises. That was a very, very important mission in the history of space flight. Two Russian tortoises actually were the first Earthlings to successfully orbit the moon. It was two Russian tortoises. They sent them to the moon, and I think it's 67 or 68. They orbit the moon and actually, again, return successfully. It's like two tortoises, and again, like a crate of fruit flies. they love just tossing a crate of fruit flies on these things. And part of the reason they picked tortoises is because they could go a really long time without eating, basically. So they were like, we're going to send these things up into space. They're going to be up there for like weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, and we like don't have a reliable way to feed them. So that's why things like tortoises were a great option for them, is because they can, you know, last that long. And so yeah, they sent these two tortoises up. Like I said, they were the first Earthlings, first living things to successfully orbit the moon and return.
So were the tortoises in free fall all that time? Were they strapped in somewhere, or how?
They were strapped in, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so early on, they basically were just strapping stuff down. Like, they didn't have a whole lot of free roaming capabilities for these animals. So like, for like a lot of, especially like the dogs and the monkeys and stuff early on, basically what they do is they'd sedate them like during the actual ascent. And the plan was basically they'd come out of their sedation once they actually got to space. And unfortunately, they oftentimes didn't care if they actually came back or not. So that was kind of the shtick there. But again, that's like, again, before any human orbited the moon. It's obviously before any human landed on the moon. A few years, like I said, I think it's like 67 is when that mission happens. I didn't write that one down. But again, once we kind of get past sort of the space race, so humans, the United States lands 2 humans on the moon in 1969. And by a lot of people's estimations, that's kind of the end of the space race. That's like when, you know, the competition kind of dies down after that point. We're like, okay, there's not any more like super realistic goals for us to like pursue here at this point. So the space race kind of dies down, and we enter this era of sort of cooperative like research within space. You have like Skylab, which is the space station that goes up, where it's kind of a collaborative effort between. It's mostly a U.S. project, but there's scientists from all over the world that are operating on Skylab. And they start doing kind of more just like research stuff, just being like, I got a weird question. I'm curious as far as like how this is going to work. So you enter an era where you're like, let's just like bring a pile of spiders to space and like see if they can like spin a web there, like see how that works.
And they could, right?
Yeah, they could.
But wasn't it distinct? It was
they were different because like they're
right?
testing like how they interact with the gravity basically, or like we're gonna bring like a fish tank into space and see what happens. And I honestly don't know what the results of all these experiments were.
I'm pretty sure that the spiders built like a 3-dimensional one.
Yeah, could be.
Like, not like a flat one.
Walking sticks have gone to space on several occasions, and part of the reason we like taking walking sticks to space so much is because they reproduce really quickly, so you can see the generations transition. They also obviously have their kind of weird, unique camouflage thing that they do, and so I think part of the initial testing with them was like, how does something that relies on like sitting on a tree and pretending to be a stick, like when you take away the gravity element of it, like how does it try and react to that? Which again, I don't think it was like supremely different. I think part of the research with them too initially was they were trying to figure out if they continued laying eggs like the way they do when they're in space, and I think they did. Don't quote me on that. Again, I didn't get that deep into like the results of a lot of these experiments. But walking sticks are one that has, as I said, been up on the ISS and was in Mir and has been, up in space on several occasions, different species of walking sticks. One pioneer that we have here at the Science Center, as far as space goes, a pretty recent thing to, become a real space pioneer, hissing cockroaches. And so hissing cockroaches, I think, had been brought up into space on a couple of occasions. They were doing a lot of the early like kind of radiation-y testing on, where it's like we just like let this thing like sit in front of a window while the sun glares on it, like what happens to it, that type of stuff. But again, relatively recently, in 2007, a female hissing cockroach became the first Earthling to conceive young in space. They successfully bred hissing cockroaches in space, and so the first Earthlings conceived in space were hissing cockroaches, just like this one. So again, pioneering, which, I mean, we haven't had humans conceived in space as far as I know yet, but probably something that's like not super far off, like as far as like, we're gonna probably start having more long-term people living up in space. The ISS is due to be turned over into some sort of more advanced station relatively soon that's probably going to be able to sustain people for longer than the International Space Station is. And I mean, when you get any group of organisms living together, like eventually someone's going to be reproducing. Like, this is how it goes. Like, we're probably not that far off from like the first humans, like I said, if not necessarily born in space, then potentially conceived in space.
I was wondering, is it possible that without gravity, is it possible to give birth? Like, I feel like that could cause some issues.
I don't know.
I don't really know how that works, but anyway.
It's a good question. Obviously, there's like a question as far as like getting to space whilst pregnant. There's like a G-force question there, obviously, which I don't know if there's been research done into that at all. If we've sent like a pregnant bunny up into space or whatever, I don't know if we've done that. I didn't see anything about it, but doesn't mean it hasn't happened. How feasible is that? I don't know. But yeah, the actual birthing process too, even, I don't know. I don't know if there's been vertebrates or even just like placental stuff in general, like born in space yet. I don't know if it's ever happened. I was trying to do some research and see if I could find like snakes that have been up into space. I didn't immediately see anything. That was the thing that struck me as kind of interesting, because it seemingly there hasn't been many, if any, snakes that have ever gone to space, because they seem like something that would have been like a prime target for, like I said, we're going to send you on a 3-month mission to the moon and not feed you.
Right.
Like that's like exactly the type of animal you want to send there.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose they're probably kind of hard to strap down though.
I suppose. I feel like that they could probably wriggle free, probably.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, there's been a lot of space-going pioneers, and like I said, when we talk about the pioneers going into space, you know, you get your Yuri Gagarins, your Alan Shepards, your John Glenns, your Sally Rides, your Valentina Tereshkovas, like all these humans that we know were doing such and such first person, first American, first woman to go to space, to orbit, to be on the moon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like I said, it's an interesting thing to think about is that for a lot of those people, like they were the first person, but there is a bunch of research, there is a bunch of effort that goes into that. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of lives that go into getting that person to that place, and a lot of the times it's animals that end up being the ones that are doing that. And you know, that's something that's not just true for space travel, it's true for a lot of research that humans do, is we, like I said, tend to test stuff on animals first. It's a very normal part of, you know, research advancement. You know, there's a reason that we, you know, when we're going to test something out for the first time, we refer to the person we're testing it on as the guinea pig. Because, you know, go back, you know, several decades and like, yeah, guinea pigs were kind of the thing that we tested stuff on originally. They've been kind of supplanted by rats in the intervening years, but for a long time, guinea pigs were like the thing that we did science experiments on before the white rats became a thing. On top of like primates and all that stuff. But anyway, that was a fun conversation. So yeah, like I said, a bunch of not necessarily immediate species that went to space, like the frogs. I don't know, everything I just said, it just says frogs, didn't say what type of frog. But close relations, if not the exact species, of a bunch of animals that have been to space here. And like I said, ones you can just find right here at the Science Center. I mean, we didn't make any particular effort to have like a good spread of animals that have been to space at the Science Center, but there's been so much experimenting that's happened with so many different types of animals going into space that, like, yeah, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, 6 right here. Plus, like I said, we got tarantulas. I don't know if tarantulas have been, but spiders have been on several occasions. Fish have been on several occasions. Again, I don't know exactly what type of fish. I mean, come during the summer, you'll find plenty of fruit flies around this building. Mealworms have been to space on several occasions, which you'll, you know, if you come during feeding day, you'll see some mealworms in our tanks because we feed them to a bunch of stuff. Geckos have been to space, who I didn't bring up today, but we have a gecko that lives here too. Yeah, I mean, just hanging out around the Science Center, you might see 10, 15 species that have, you know, been into space. And it's not necessarily a way that not something that we necessarily think about all the time, like, well, how we can, you know, appreciate these animals and their contributions to science beyond just like talking about a gray tree frog in the context of it as like a gray tree frog that exists in Minnesota and sort of the fun biology of that. Like,
and also as an astronaut.
Yeah, also as a spacefaring pioneer.
Yes.
But anyway, the Headwater Science Center is open 7 days a week. We are open 9:30 to 5, Monday through Saturday. We're open from 1 to 5 on Sundays, so swing by after lunch on Sundays. If you happen to come by at 3:30, we'll probably be doing one of these shows. We shoot them most days, not quite every day. And you're welcome to sit and hang out if you'd like. We've had a couple guests walking by off and on here as I've been talking. But yeah, you're welcome to come and hang out if we're shooting a show when you happen to come by. But yeah, otherwise, we'd love to see you come by, and we will see you, what's today? Friday? Tomorrow's Saturday. Might do a show tomorrow, probably be Carl if it's anybody, so there might be a show tomorrow, but you can tune in then.